This is over 1 hour of Jujutsu Kaisen what ifs. We have what if Sukuna was actually a good guy? Spoiler, he and Gojo become besties. There's what if Yuji could steal curse techniques? There's a Gojo version of that. What if Gojo was never born? What if Yuji basically used Talk no Jujutsu on cursed spirits and made them join his side? And much, much more. And let's begin with what if Sukuna was reborn as a good guy?
Have you ever wondered what would have happened if Sukuna was reborn with all his memories and turned good? What would he do differently this time around? And most importantly, would he allow Yuji to use his powers and help the sorcerers defeat their enemies? So as Sukuna is reborn, the first thing he sees is a black void as he wakes up, stuck inside his cursed fingers. In the time spent waiting, Sukuna would remember everything that happened in his previous life and realize he has been reborn. Meanwhile, a normal but strong high school student named Yuji Itadori finds himself face to face with a monstrous cursed spirit about to eat his friends. Without a second thought, he makes a decision that will completely change his life and shoves a special grade cursed object right into his mouth, thus beginning the story all over again. The second Yuji eats the finger, Sukuna awakens inside him like a ticking time bomb. Laughing manically, he would yell with excitement as he's been given a second chance at life. But just like the main story, Yuji would swiftly take back control of his body. Now the question is, would Sukuna immediately turn to being a good guy? I don't think so. I mean, he's still the king of curses, a mass murderer, and the most powerful being in history. We can't just make Sukuna some softy who cries about his feelings all of a sudden. So instead, Sukuna would gradually begin to change his ways throughout the story. But before we talk about that, let's quickly cover what happens after. Same as the main story, Gojo finally arrives to assess the situation, asking Yuji for a quick sparring session with Sukuna and taking him back to Jujutsu High. But this time, the quick bout with Gojo would rub Sukuna the wrong way. He would be quite annoyed that even though in his past life he beat Gojo, now that he's been reborn, he still has to live through the fact that Gojo thinks he's the strongest sorcerer. This is when Sukuna would make a decision to help Yuji become the strongest sorcerer, not out of kindness, but to shove it up Gojo's butt once again. This would be pretty consistent with Sukuna's character in the main story. I mean, his ego has always been huge, and in his final moments in his previous life, he did seem redeemable. But anyway, as Gojo takes Yuji back to Jujutsu High to meet Principal Yaga, Sukuna would speak to Yuji, telling him he will make him the strongest sorcerer alive if he stops being a controlling brat. Obviously, Yuji would think it's a trick and tell Sukuna that he'll never give up control of his body. Frustrated, Sukuna would think of telling Yuji about his rebirth and how he's trying to turn a new leaf. But he would end up deciding against that, hoping to convince Yuji some other way. The meeting with Principal Yaga would go pretty much the same as the main story. The next day, Gojo, Megumi, and Yuji would visit Nobara, and the events of that arc would play out. But this time, when Gojo offers to give Yuji a weapon since he doesn't know how to control cursed energy yet, Sukuna would sneakily take partial control of Yuji's arm and slap it away. Speaking through Yuji's mouth, Sukuna would say, "The boy doesn't need it." Gojo would find it interesting and allow Yuji to go in without it. Entering the building with Nobara, everything would play out the same as before, but with Sukuna guiding Yuji by helping him detect the two cursed spirits and giving Yuji a bit of cursed energy to exorcise both of them. This would annoy Yuji at first, but he would get over it eventually. As the two young sorcerers come out of the building as fast as they went in, Gojo would sense that Sukuna's cursed energy is beginning to pour out of Yuji as if he's borrowing his powers. He would be more suspicious of Yuji as he's never heard of a special grade cursed spirit, let alone Sukuna lending power to his vessel. But he wouldn't worry about it too much. A month later, the trio would go on a mission to evacuate the detention center, and it's here that Yuji was forced to form a pact with Sukuna to survive. But in this timeline, Sukuna is reborn with a change of heart, so as they face the special grade cursed spirit, Sukuna would watch the two sorcerers struggle against it and remember what Yuji had said to him as he died in his previous life. With that in mind, Sukuna would speak to Yuji once again, telling him to form a pact that'll allow him to harness his cursed technique. Yuji would of course be skeptical about this, but seeing as Sukuna helped him during his first mission, he would agree. All Yuji had to do was say the word release. At that moment, Sukuna's cursed energy would flood the atmosphere as Yuji uses cleave and dismantle to chop up the cursed spirit into millions of pieces. This would completely shock Megumi as he didn't know Yuji had a cursed technique or even cursed energy that powerful. But Yuji would just laugh it off saying, "Sukuna, help!" Megumi would be confused and report the whole situation to Gojo. Now here is where things get interesting. Even though Gojo trusts Yuji, this is still a very weird situation, and Gojo being Gojo would ask Yuji for another sparring sparring session, but this time he wants to fight Yuji, not Sukuna. Before the fight, he would give Yuji another finger to eat, increasing Yuji's cursed energy. Sukuna would find this absolutely hilarious and tell Yuji to show off a little. The two would begin to battle, and just like all fights against Gojo, he can't be touched. That's when Sukuna would tell Yuji to use his power again. Yuji would agree, but this time, Sukuna would do something surprising. As Yuji says, "Release!" and begins using the shrine, Sukuna would change the slashes into the world-cutting slash, though less powerful because of the lack of fingers eaten. This would leave a small cut on Gojo's cheek, which would shock both Gojo and everyone watching. Sukuna would grin inside Yuji while Gojo smiles in excitement. Gojo would say, "Not bad, Yuji." Yuji just stands there, deeply confused, but relieved that Gojo is alright. Gojo would then call the training off as he's seen enough. He would then ask Yuji how long this pact has been active, and Yuji would say since the detention center. Satisfied with everything that he's seen, Gojo would tell everyone it's alright, Yuji is in control. It's important to know that even though Gojo fought Yuji, he was holding back a lot so that he wouldn't hurt his student. Some time would pass, and just like the main story, Gojo would be attacked by Jogo. He would see this as an opportunity to teach Yuji about domain expansion, since he will most likely be able to use it because of Sukuna. As he brings Yuji to the battle, Sukuna would choose not to interfere, as he wants to see Sukuna would begin developing some type of rivalry. By the way, if you've been looking for a way to watch anime that aren't available in your country but don't know how, click the link below to get NordVPN for 76% off. So it's just $3 a month, and you can set any location you want to watch any anime you want. And there's a 30-day money-back guarantee if you don't like it. Click the link below to get it. Now, back to the video. A month would pass by, and Gojo would decide to send Yuji and Hanami on a mission regarding some weird activities inside a movie theater. Although in the main story, this mission was probably one of Yuji's toughest ones yet, in this timeline, you would think it would be much better with Sukuna there to help. But it's not exactly what you think. With that said, it would go pretty much the same as before, with Nanami and Yuji investigating some transfigured humans, fighting a couple of battles, and meeting Junpei. They would also end up confronting Mahito. In the original story, Sukuna laughs alongside Mahito when Junpei is turned into a transfigured human. And you might think, since Sukuna is somewhat of a good guy in this timeline, he wouldn't let this happen. Well, this is where you would be wrong. You see, Sukuna, having his memories, would understand that this moment is essential in teaching Yuji the wicked life that is being a Jujutsu sorcerer. And without this moment, Yuji's resolve wouldn't be as strong as it was in his past life. So when Mahito turns Junpei, Sukuna would simply do nothing, even when Yuji pleaded with him to use reverse curse technique to help him. This would cause Yuji to resent Sukuna and refuse to use his powers. Everything else would play out the same as before, with Mahito trying to touch Yuji's soul, getting one-shot by Sukuna, and ultimately escaping. After the Junpei incident, Nanami and Yuji would submit a mission report to Gojo, sympathetic about what happened. Gojo would ask Yuji why Sukuna didn't help him this time. Yuji would tell him he doesn't know, and that he was stupid to trust an evil cursed spirit. But before Yuji left, Gojo would tell him that although he doesn't like the guy and doesn't trust him one bit, the reason he didn't help was because reverse curse technique wouldn't work in that situation. A detail Sukuna left out, probably because he doesn't care if Yuji likes him or not. I mean, he's still Sukuna after all. This would make Yuji think a little differently about Sukuna, and maybe in the near future, he might use his powers again. A few weeks later, Yuji and the students would begin preparing for the Goodwill event, which would go completely differently in this timeline. Firstly, since Yuji is openly using Sukuna's power, the higher-ups would want him even more dead than before. Yoshinobu would tell his students to kill Yuji just like the main story, but it would be a pointless action as Todo would interfere, wanting to see this Sukuna vessel borrowing the king's power in action. Yuji, still not fully over what happened before, would refuse to fight Todo using Sukuna's powers, which he would respect. Todo would obviously teach Yuji a few things too, and that's when the curses would attack the school. As soon as Hanami engages in battle with Yuji and Todo, he would be surprised to see that Yuji's cursed energy is much more sinister and evil, almost as if his cursed energy and Sukuna's are merging. But anyway, the fight goes similarly at first, with both sides getting a few hits in, with Yuji even using Black Flash, until Sukuna would speak to Yuji again, telling him this cursed spirit is going to cause the sorcerer's problems down the line, they should exorcise it now. Yuji would ignore it at first, but eventually would say the word to unleash Shrine once again. Once Yuji began using Shrine, it was practically over for Hanami, because at that moment Yuji through Sukuna used domain expansion, slicing the curse to pieces, making Todo so proud of his besto friendo. This would mean Gojo wouldn't need to interfere this this time in the story. The next arc would be the death paintings, but this arc would go exactly like in the original story, so we'll move on from that. A few months would pass, and the Shibuya incident would finally arrive. Kenjaku's plan would be the same as before, but what Kenjaku hasn't accounted for is that this time, Gojo isn't walking into Shibuya alone, because Sukuna, watching events unfold through Yuji's eyes, knows exactly what Kenjaku is planning. When the barrier goes up over Shibuya, Sukuna does something completely unprecedented. He talks to Yuji first. He lays out the entire plan, but he does leave out some key information because he wants to enjoy the show as well. Yuji would obviously be confused and ask Sukuna how he knows this, but Sukuna would just tell him off. Yuji would relay everything to Gojo. Gojo listens. He looks at Yuji and says, "Tell the fossil I said thanks." Now, because Gojo knows all about Shibuya, he would tell Yuji to enter with him since he thinks he's ready. But Yuji would tell him he needs to break the barrier first. Gojo would quickly do that since Sukuna told Yuji where it is, and then the two of them would enter the train station together. There, they would find Jogo and Mahito together instead of Hanami, since she's already dead. The curses would be shocked to see Yuji alongside Gojo, but they would still continue their plans, thinking Yuji is not a threat. This is when Gojo would teleport behind Jogo, snatching something and returning to Yuji. Jogo would be confused, thinking why Gojo didn't just kill him there. But the reason Gojo did that was to take the Sukuna fingers he had and give them to Yuji. Yuji would only eat one finger for now, in fear of Sukuna taking over. But suddenly Sukuna would say, "Enchant." Out of nowhere, Sukuna would fully manifest in Yuji and shove all the fingers inside his mouth, which would shock everyone. The curses would laugh, happy that Sukuna is back and on their side. But little do they know, Sukuna is actually doing a good thing here. In his own selfish way, of course. I know you guys might be wondering how Sukuna can just manifest out of nowhere. Well, remember the pact Yuji and Sukuna made back in the detention center? This allowed Yuji to use Shrine when he said the word release. The other part of the pact was Sukuna getting 1 minute to manifest inside Yuji using the word enchant, which Yuji was made to forget. But because Sukuna also ate 10 fingers all at once, the 1 minute timer would be rendered useless as Yuji's body is still managing to digest all of these fingers. Which means Sukuna is free to do as he pleases. And what Sukuna pleases is a competition with Gojo. He would tell him that the sorcerer to exercise or kills the most enemies wins. Gojo would smile, saying, "Is that right?" All the curses would be absolutely perplexed and make a run for it. Gojo and Sukuna would begin the chase, executing every enemy left and right like it's a game of whack-a-mole. Mahito would try using his technique to touch Sukuna's soul, but Sukuna would just end him with a bunch of slashes. Gojo would show no mercy to Jogo and eviscerate him using hollow purple. Man, that guy can't catch a break. Seeing as these two are the strongest, the entire enemy force would be all but dead before 10 minutes hit. After that, all the veils would be lifted, and the sorcerers standing outside Shibuya would all be surprised to see that there isn't one enemy alive, which means no sorcerer would die in this timeline. The question now would be, what happens to Sukuna? The higher-ups want him dealt with immediately, but Yuji stands in front of the higher-ups and makes his case. Gojo backs him up, mostly because he thinks the whole situation is fascinating, and partly because he genuinely believes Yuji, and he is secretly loving the bromance he and Sukuna have. The higher-ups would obviously refuse, but what can they do? These are the two most powerful beings ever. Eventually, they would let it go, allowing Yuji and Sukuna to coexist.
There are still 6 more insane what-if scenarios I'll cover in this video. And let's continue with what would happen if Yuji could steal curse techniques. So the story would begin pretty similar to the original, with Yuji growing up with his grandpa. However, in this timeline, Yuji would have a curse technique that allows him to steal curse techniques of the people he defeats. Kinda like Yuta's copy technique. The only difference is that Yuji steals and keeps the technique forever, unless he chooses to pass it on to someone or give it back to the owner. Pretty broken, right? Yuji wouldn't really know he has this ability at this time, since even in the main story, he only truly unlocked his cursed energy potential when he ate one of Sukuna's fingers. So the same would happen here. Okay, so far Yuji's ability hasn't really been used yet, but that would all change once he meets Principal Yaga. Now, if you remember in the show, Yuji fought one of Principal Yaga's cursed corpses, and since cursed corpses have the Principal's cursed energy fused inside them, when Yuji defeats one of them, something weird would happen. A surge of energy would rush into Yuji's body as all of the Principal cursed corpses run to Yuji's side. The Principal would try calling the dolls back, but they wouldn't listen. That's when Yaga would realize he doesn't have his technique anymore. This would shock everyone in the room, including Yuji. They would all realize that Yuji's curse technique is stealing the techniques of people he defeats.
Gojo would tell Yuji to give it back, but Yuji would say he doesn't know how to do that. Eventually, Principal Yaga would decide to allow Yuji to keep his technique for now until he learns how to give it back. But he would ask Yuji to give him some of the cursed corpses he now controls, in case he needs protection. And so the higher-ups don't suspect Yuji's ability to steal techniques. Okay, that was pretty crazy. But now Yuji, on top of his ability to steal cursed techniques, would also have puppet manipulation, the ability to create and control cursed dolls. The next day, Gojo, Yuji, and Megumi would visit Nobara like before, and that arc would play out the same. However, a few weeks later, Yuji would face one of his toughest battles so far. Around this time, the trio went on a mission to evacuate the detention center, and it's here that Yuji faced this special grade spirit and was forced to form a pact with Sukuna to survive. Well, in this timeline, the arc would begin the same, with the trio being trapped and forced to split up. Once Yuji and Megumi come face to face with the cursed spirit, Yuji would use some of his cursed dolls to attack it. But would this be enough to defeat this special grade curse? Well, I don't think so, but it would be a good distraction for the two sorcerers to rescue Nobara and escape, calling for backup, and eventually some grade 1 sorcerers would come and execute the special grade. Since he didn't need to switch with Sukuna to survive, Yuji doesn't die. After coming back from the mission, Yuji would eat another one of Sukuna's fingers extracted from the special grade they escaped from. While all this was happening, Sukuna would find Yuji's ability to steal cursed techniques very interesting, just like how he did for Megumi's in the main story. But he would know taking over Yuji's body would be practically impossible because of his role as the perfect vessel. A few days later, Gojo would visit Yuji and tell him that his actions at the detention center has raised the higher-up suspicions of what his technique is, and that he would have to learn how to give the principal's technique back quickly, or else the higher-ups might figure it out. Yuji would tell Gojo that he thinks he's gotten better at controlling this power, and that he finally knows how to give the principal's technique back. The two would head down to the principal, and just like that, Yuji would give his power back and thank the principal for letting him borrow it. Gojo would then leave Yuji at school as he heads out. It's important to remember that around this time, in the main story, Jogo attacked Gojo, so it's probably right to say it'll happen again, but this time it would have a completely different outcome. During the fight, Gojo would realize that if he weakens Jogo and brings Yuji there to finish the job, he would be able to steal the curse's technique, which would greatly benefit the sorcerer's side. So as the fight goes on, Gojo would teleport Yuji, bringing him straight to Jogo. After that, he would quickly open his domain expansion, frying the cursed spirit's brain, and instruct Yuji to hit the cursed spirit with a punch to knock him down, which would technically count as Yuji defeating him. Yuji would do as Gojo said, and just like that, the same surge of cursed energy would run through Yuji's body as he has now stolen Jogo's technique. But before he could fully exercise Jogo, Hanami would rush in just like the main story and take him away. Okay, this fight went completely different this time around, and the best part is, Yuji has now stolen an overpowered curse technique, making him super strong. This would also mean Jogo wouldn't be as useful in Shibuya, as he doesn't have a cursed technique anymore and has to rely only on his cursed energy and physical strength. A few months would pass by, and Gojo would decide to send Yuji and Nanami on a mission to a movie theater, where there's been some weird reports recently. During the mission, things would go mostly the same, with Yuji meeting Junpei and becoming good friends. And after doing a little more investigating, Nanami and Yuji would figure out that Mahito is behind all these recent reports. The same events would take place up until Junpei and Yuji begin their fight. Seeing as Yuji is much stronger in this timeline with Jogo's technique, I see no problem in him quickly knocking Junpei out with some of Jogo's disaster fly things and keeping him restrained until they deal with Mahito. This would also mean that Junpei's curse technique, Moondregs, would transfer to Yuji. But before he could give it back to him, Mahito would arrive, and just like the main story, they would begin their fight. I do believe because Mahito didn't turn Junpei into a transfigured human in this timeline, he would be really mad and fight with much more carelessness, which would be a good thing for Yuji. Mahito wouldn't really know about Yuji's ability yet, as Jogo wasn't aware of what happened after Gojo fried his brain with infinity, so he didn't realize that his technique was stolen yet, so he couldn't tell the other disaster curses and Kenjaku. As Mahito and Yuji fight, Yuji would begin overwhelming him after he started using his disaster flames, along with his incredible physical strength. Mahito would be confused and shocked that Yuji has Jogo's curse technique and ask him how this is even possible. Yuji would just chalk it down as genetics and continue beating down the curse. I think with Yuji having disaster flames, probably one of the most destructive curse techniques in the show, he wouldn't have much trouble with Mahito. Seeing that even in the original story, Yuji put up a good fight without even having a technique. With the help of Hanami, they would eventually exorcise Mahito before he could even escape. And just like that, Yuji would have just defeated one of Kenjaku's core pieces in his master plan. Yuji would also now be able to use idol transfiguration as well as Jogo's disaster flames. Man, imagine how cool this would be for Yuji to have these two techniques on hand. Also, I forgot to mention that after the battle, Yuji would explain everything to Junpei, and that he should join Jujutsu High, where he could learn to defend himself and start a new life. He would also give his technique back. So yeah, in this timeline, Junpei joins the gang at Jujutsu Tech. During the time that passes, the students would begin preparing for the Goodwill event, with Nobara and the rest of the second years being super excited to learn about Yuji's new powers. They would be very confident in winning the event with Yuji being so strong. From there, the Kyoto Goodwill event would begin mostly the same, with Yuji being tasked to take down Todo. But this time, as these two students fight, Yuji would overpower Todo with his idol transfiguration, probably turning his fist into a giant fist and punching him with it, making Todo super happy and calling Yuji his besto friendo. Eventually, the curses would disrupt the event, but this time they'd be extra careful to avoid Yuji, as they had finally figured out that he has the ability to steal techniques. Everything else would play out similarly to the main story, as Gojo would eventually arrive and launch his hollow purple, causing Hanami to flee. One thing that still happens in this timeline is Kenjaku stealing the death paintings and some cursed objects from Jujutsu High. But would he still go through with the Shibuya incident, seeing as Mahito is now dead, and he can't really start the culling game without his technique? Well, I think he actually will. Remember, Kenjaku's curse technique enables him to steal anyone's body by implanting his brain inside their heads. And if he does that to Yuji, he would also be able to use all the techniques Yuji stole, including idol transfiguration. Anyways, a few days later, Yuji, Nobara, and Megumi would be sent on a mission to investigate the bridge victims. Here, Nobara and Yuji would face off against the two death painting brothers. And just like the main story, they would easily defeat them, adding a third stolen curse technique, the Rot technique, used by 𝒂𝒆𝒄𝒐𝒎𝒆 to Yuji's arsenal. It's around this time that Yuji would start getting praised as the third strongest sorcerer behind Gojo and Yuta. I mean, he might even be number 2, with all these curse techniques in his full control. This would cause an uproar with the higher-ups, but they can't really do anything about it. Soon enough, the night of the Shibuya incident would arrive, and the barrier would spread over the city. Gojo would be the first one on the scene. He would enter the domain like it's nothing and quickly head to the lower levels of the station. There, he would find a bunch of humans and cursed spirits ready to take him on. He would also find Jogo, Hanami, and Choso there. They would briefly taunt Gojo, saying they know he can never hurt civilians. But Gojo would laugh, calling Jogo a wannabe villain, as he has no curse technique to even fight with. Jogo would be pissed and tell Gojo he will make Yuji give back his technique. In the meantime, the barrier would be lifted, and the rest of the sorcerers would be permitted to enter the station to help Gojo. But even as powerful as Yuji is right now, I don't think he'd make it in time to save Gojo from being sealed. Before that happened, Gojo managed to exorcise Hanami just like the main story. A few moments later, Kenjaku would let the curses know that they have to find Yuji Itadori, as he's essential to complete his plan. Choso would want to find Yuji first to get revenge for his brothers, and Jogo would want to find him to force him to return his technique. And Kenjaku? Well, he has an even bigger plan in mind. But unlike the original story, Kenjaku would end up finding the boy first, knocking him out by a sneak attack and keeping him tied up, as Kenjaku knows Yuji. With so many different curse techniques, Yuji is too powerful, and it's now time for him to take his body for himself. Yuji would try resisting, but it'd be pointless. Just before Kenjaku implants his brain into Yuji's body, Sukuna would speak through Yuji, telling Kenjaku that he mustn't forget the deal they made during the Heian era, and that he must feed Yuji all of his fingers so that he can take control of Yuji's body for a short while to switch vessels. Kenjaku would agree, and feed Yuji all the remaining fingers he has, bringing the total to 15, and just like that, Sukuna would take over Yuji's body for a few minutes. In that time, Sukuna would rush to Megumi's location, break off his own finger, and feed it to him, reincarnating inside Megumi's body. Sukuna would laugh, saying he's been waiting for this for so long. This would shock Yuji completely, causing him to go on an absolute rampage in a fight against Sukuna to take Megumi's body back. Yuji would know exactly how to do so because of his experience using idol transfiguration. But would Yuji be strong enough to keep up with 15-finger Sukuna? I think he would be strong enough to keep up, but wouldn't be strong enough to fully defeat the King of Curses. But as this crazy fight is going on, the rest of the sorcerers would end up finding Kenjaku, and with the combined force of Todo, Nanami, Yuki, Noritoshi, and all the other other sorcerers, I think they would be able to overwhelm Kenjaku before Jogo and Choso can back him up. Remember, some of the sorcerers barely fought in this timeline due to the cursed spirits not having Mahito in their corner, so it's safe to say they would easily take Kenjaku prisoner, steal the prison realm, and free Gojo before backup arrived. After that, they would use the prison realm to seal Kenjaku in it instead. In his last moments, Kenjaku would yell, saying how Yuji was so lucky to be born with such an ability. With Gojo free, Hanami would explain the whole situation to him. Gojo would then head straight towards Sukuna and Yuji's location as the rest of the sorcerers deal with the other cursed spirits. I think they would be more than enough to take down a no-technique Jogo and Choso. Although unfortunate, Choso would die in this timeline. But anyway, once Gojo reaches Yuji, he would be very proud that Yuji held his own against Sukuna, even though he's been beaten up pretty badly. It would now be a 2-on-1 against Sukuna, but unfortunately, it wouldn't last, as Sukuna would summon Mahoraga and merged Beast Adito, making it a 3-on-2. The battle would be fierce and cause most of the city to be destroyed, but would Gojo and Yuji be able to actually defeat Sukuna together? Well, I think yes, seeing as Gojo was able to fight and almost win against almost full-powered Sukuna with the 10 shadows in the manga. Plus, with this overpowered version of Yuji with idol transfiguration, disaster flames, and the rot technique, I think they would eventually destroy Mahoraga. Yuji would then split Megumi and Sukuna's souls from the body with idol transfiguration. As Sukuna is in this weakened state, Gojo would end the battle with a final blow, ending the King of Curses for good.
Man, I wish this scenario actually happened in the show. It'd be so cool. However, one scenario I'm glad didn't happen is the cursed spirits being reborn with their memories. But what if it did happen?
Have you ever wondered what would have happened if all the disaster curses were reborn with their memories? What would they do differently this time around? And most importantly, would they be able to avoid their deaths and actually succeed in taking over the human race? Well, as the disaster curses are reborn, they would be completely confused at first, not knowing what happened. However, they would soon realize that they are seemingly back in the past with all of their future memories intact, vowing to themselves to get revenge on every human who wronged them and take over Japan as the rightful species. Each disaster curse would start crafting their new path, awaiting the day of the Shibuya incident, where they would claim their victory. In the original story, the disaster curses do not just spontaneously band together. Kenjaku orchestrates everything, but this time, they find each other on their own. It starts with Mahito. He understands almost immediately that if he acts the way he did before, messing with humans at random, drawing the attention of sorcerers right away, he will end up in the same position. So Mahito seeks out all the disaster curses and tells them everything about what Kenjaku was truly planning. Since Mahito was the only one who saw Kenjaku's betrayal, he would tell the others everything. Furious about all of this, they would all agree with what Mahito's saying and ask him what they should do. That's when they'll devise a strategy to let Kenjaku come to them and make him think his plan is playing out exactly as he expected. And while Kenjaku is distracted running his little scheme, they would enact their own plan under his nose. And so the four of them would wait, acting normal, or at least normal for cursed spirits. When Kenjaku eventually comes to recruit them, they accept him with open arms. They would listen to his speech about the King of Curses, the Paradise of Curses, and the coming of the Golden Age of cursed spirits. They'd let him believe he is the most brilliant being in the room. It wasn't easy for them, by the way, especially Jogo, who has to physically restrain himself from incinerating Kenjaku the moment he walks in. But he ended up holding on, for now. As the days go on, they attend all Kenjaku's meetings, discussing plans and following his instructions to the letter. They appear to be exactly what he expects. Powerful, proud, and just a little too arrogant to question his plan. And while doing all of that, they are running their own operation underneath it. In the original timeline, none of the curses knew what Kenjaku was truly planning. Now they know. The second piece of intelligence is Sukuna. Jogo especially wrestles with this. In his past life, he genuinely believed that Sukuna would side with them. But as we all know, Sukuna couldn't care less about cursed spirit paradise. The third piece is Gojo. The entire Shibuya plan hinged on sealing Gojo first in the main story. Everything else was built around that. Without Gojo out of the picture, Kenjaku's operation falls apart. The curses would discuss if allowing Gojo to be sealed is the right move, and eventually, they would come to the realization that Gojo is too strong to be free, regardless of the situation. Now, while all of this is happening in the background, the rest of the Jujutsu Jujutsu world is moving at its usual pace. Yuji eats Sukuna's finger, joins Jujutsu High with Nobara, and the trio goes on their usual missions. The first major change in this story would be the battle between Jogo and Gojo. You see, Jogo chose to battle Gojo as a way to prove to Kenjaku that he was stronger than any human. But this time, Jogo wouldn't be so foolish, since he has all of his memories. He knows Gojo's going to beat him, so he planned to do something different this time. Instead of attacking Gojo head-on, they would send a special-grade curse spirit, who they fed one of Sukuna's fingers, like the finger bearer, to attack Gojo instead. Just to mess with him a little. Obviously, Gojo would defeat this cursed spirit pretty easily, but in the distance, Jogo and the rest of the disaster curses would be watching. Gojo would sense them there, but decide to ignore them anyway, since they're all weak. A few days pass, and Gojo would send Yuji and Hanami on a mission to investigate a series of disturbances tied to transfigured humans. In the original story, this led directly to the confrontation with Mahito in the sewers, which led to a huge fight and Mahito's first encounter with his arch-nemesis, Yuji. This time, Mahito would be ready. He lets the investigation go on as before. Yuji and Hanami figure out that a high school kid is connected to all of this and look to investigate the kid. But this time, Mahito would be ahead of them. Same as the main story, Yuji would befriend Junpei and have dinner at his house. But all of this was part of Mahito's plan. Seeing as Junpei might be a liability in Mahito's future plans and wanting to get revenge on Yuji for what he did to him in the past, Mahito would kill both Junpei and his mother, leaving Yuji crushed and their investigation unfinished. This would deeply affect Yuji as he saw Junpei as his friend and really grew close with him and his mom. Mahito made sure to leave some evidence connecting him to the murder so that Yuji has even more reason to hate and blame him. So in this timeline, Hanami and Yuji never fight Mahito, which might be a good thing for now, but it would definitely hurt them later on. Just wait and see. A few months later, Yuji and the rest of the students would begin preparing for the Goodwill event, which would go completely differently. It's important to note that in the original story, Jogo wasn't involved in the attack on Jujutsu High because he was still recovering from his defeat by Gojo. And since he never fought Gojo in this timeline, he would join Hanami in the attack, while Mahito and the others go on their own mission to steal the death paintings and a few other stuff. Everything would begin the same as the main story, with the students going against each other when suddenly, Hanami and Jogo attack the school. Jogo and Hanami would split up, with Hanami attacking Megumi, Inumaki, and Noritoshi, while Jogo fights both Yuji and Todo. But this fight does not go the students' way at all. As we all know, Jogo is multiple times stronger than most cursed spirits and is arguably the strongest disaster curse. He would attack Todo first, testing his strength. Todo would realize that this cursed spirit is no joke and begin executing combos and different attacks with Yuji using his boogie woogie technique. But this would prove useless against Jogo as he began overwhelming the pair. In a shocking moment, Jogo would drive his fiery fist through Todo's stomach, causing him to fall in pain. Yuji would be stunned by this and rush to help Todo, but that's when Jogo would decide to leave them be, seeing as he didn't want to interfere with Sukuna's vessel just yet. He still has PTSD from his past life. Meanwhile, Hanami would most likely heavily injure Megumi, Inumaki, and Noritoshi before fleeing. As all of this is going on, Gojo would finally break the veil and launch a hollow purple attack towards Jogo. But this is when Jogo would lose himself a little bit and try to go attack for attack against the strongest sorcerer. Launching his very own Maximum Meteor, the two attacks would clash, but Gojo's attack would prevail and cut Jogo's arm and legs clean off before he narrowly escaped. After the situation dies down, the teachers would rush towards Todo and the other students who were hurt. Using Shoko's reverse curse technique, she would heal all of them as best as she could. Unfortunately, Todo's injuries would be too severe, leading to his death, which would devastate all the students. This would mean that Todo won't be able to help Yuji in his battle against Mahito. Also, Megumi and the other students injured by Hanami would be out of the battle in Shibuya because of their injuries. As the curses head back to regroup with Kenjaku, he would begin to notice that something was slightly off with the disasters. Jogo in particular has become disciplined in a way that does not fit his character. Kenjaku begins running quiet tests to see if they are truly loyal to him and his plans. He gives slightly incorrect information, hoping Mahito, Jogo, and the rest of the curses would act on it. But unfortunately for Kenjaku, neither of them takes the bait. That's when Kenjaku realizes he doesn't know the full picture yet. He has no way of knowing about the rebirth, but he knows that the disasters are running a secondary agenda. He begins to accelerate his own plans in response. If they are planning something, he needs Shibuya to happen before they can execute it. And this, more than anything else, is the move that seals his fate. But before the Shibuya incident, we need to talk about a quick detour that Kenjaku and Mahito take. It's important to remember that the reason Mahito Mahito and the disaster curses were able to infiltrate Jujutsu High was because of Kokichi, who was giving intel to Kenjaku in exchange for Mahito changing his heavenly restriction body. Well, everything plays out pretty much the same, but instead of Mahito fighting Kokichi out of pure lust for battle, he would sneakily ask Kenjaku why he never fights, and how unfair it is that they do all the work while he just stands there. Seeing as Kenjaku wouldn't want to look like a weakling in front of his disciple, he would oblige and take on Mechamaru himself. Although the fight would be brief, with Kenjaku easily killing Kokichi, this would give Mahito a chance to observe his power and understand his weaknesses. After that, some time would pass until the night of the Shibuya incident arrived, and on the surface, it looks exactly the way Kenjaku designed it. And at the center of it all, Gojo Satoru walks into the station about to do his usual cleanup mission. Gojo descends into the train station looking for the barrier caster. Everything else would play out pretty much the same as before, but instead of finding all of the disaster curses, he would only find Hanami and Choso. This is where the plan diverges from everything that happened before. In the original timeline, Gojo fought Hanami and Jogo together and handled them relatively comfortably. But this time, Hanami is not there to be beaten that easily. She is there to buy time. The two begin battling with the help of some transfigured humans, Choso, and other freelance sorcerers. They would manage to slow him down without giving him a clean target. Gojo would get and charge up an attack. That's when Jogo would surprise him, attacking him from below. Using domain amplification that Kenjaku taught him, he would land a hit on the untouchable sorcerer. The half-second created from this would allow the curses time to enact their plan. Mahito, who's been waiting in the exact position for a while, attacks Gojo from behind. And for the first time since Toji Zenin, something actually connects with Gojo Satoru's soul. Mahito would open his domain for 3 seconds, touching Gojo's soul and then deactivating it right after. To avoid a domain clash that would result in Gojo winning, the touch would be brief. It can't kill Gojo, but it does do a little bit of damage to buy more time. And in that moment, all 3 curses move at once. They all send simultaneous attacks at Gojo, though none reach him. That's when Kenjaku shows up behind Gojo, the same way he did before. With that split second, all those memories of his old friend rushed back. Gojo gets sealed. The curses and Kenjaku all look at the cube in disbelief. Is it done? Mahito asks. Kenjaku looks at the cube for a long moment. That part is, he says. Kenjaku would then yell at the curses, telling them that this wasn't part of the plan even though it worked. What he does not expect is for all 4 of the disaster curses to be standing between him and the exit. Kenjaku understands the situation and realizes he'd been double-crossed. Well, Kenjaku says with genuine appreciation in his voice, how long have you known? Since before you found us, Mahito says. We have always known. What follows is an epic battle. Kenjaku is extraordinarily powerful and extremely cunning, and he has spent centuries contingency planning for betrayal. But the disaster curses have spent months specifically preparing for this confrontation. Hanami neutralizes the terrain, making escape seemingly impossible. Jogo burns through Kenjaku's cursed spirits, and Mahito goes straight for the soul inside the borrowed body. The battle is intense. Kenjaku lands devastating counters, leaving Jogo to lose most of his lower body. Hanami's branches are half destroyed before the fight ends, but it was ultimately the curses that overwhelmed the ancient sorcerer. Kenjaku dies at the hands of the disaster curses. Mahito looks down at what remains of the ancient sorcerer who killed him in another life. He says quietly, "Goodbye, Kenjaku." With Gojo sealed and Kenjaku dead, the rest of Shibuya belongs to the disaster curses. They swiftly take care of all sorcerers and humans in the vicinity. Friend or foe, it doesn't matter. In the time that passes, the disaster curses would have massacred half the population of Japan, including the sorcerers. Devastated Yuji would collapse in despair, as he is the only human left in Shibuya, which brings us to the final act of the curse's plan. Letting Yuji live means leaving the biggest wildcard in existence walking around with a built-in nuclear weapon. Mahito had been thinking about this problem ever since they were reborn, but in the end, the disasters make a choice that nobody in the original timeline ever had to make. They take Yuji alive. Yuji tries to resist, but it's pointless. Mahito is almost impressed. Almost. They seal Yuji in a similar barrier to what Tengen used to keep dangerous items locked away. Inside the prison, Sukuna speaks to them through Yuji's mouth with the familiar contempt of a being who has never once taken any other creature seriously. "You think this holds me?" Sukuna says. "Cute. It holds Itadori," Mahito says. By the time the sun rises over Shibuya, the Jujutsu world has completely changed. The schools are all destroyed. Practically every sorcerer is dead, and nothing can stop the curses from taking over the world. Unless a certain sorcerer comes back from Africa.
4 more scenarios left to cover, and let's continue with this one. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if everyone Yuji defeated actually joined his side? How strong would the sorcerer's side be this time around? And most importantly, would Yuji be able to defeat his enemies much more easily with their help? So the story would play out mostly the same for Yuji during his early days. He would live a normal high school life, spending his afternoons with his friends in the occult club and saying goodbye to his grandfather as he passed away. Same as in the original, Megami would show up at Yuji's high school looking for Sukuna's fingers, only to find it already in the hands of Yuji's clubmates. Eventually, the night would come when Sasaki and Iguchi broke the seal at school, and everything went sideways. Curses start crawling through the halls, Megami and his divine dogs try to control the situation, and Yuji crashes through the 4th floor window to save his friends. But here is where things start to change. You see, in this scenario, Yuji would be more empathetic towards the cursed spirits and try to make friends with them, kinda like Naruto's Talk no Jutsu. You'll have to wait and see if this actually works on the curses. So during the fight against this cursed spirit, he would try to talk to it, which would confuse Megami. But unfortunately for Yuji, this cursed spirit would not want to listen to him at all, and eventually Yuji would get caught by the curse and be forced to eat Sukuna's fingers, reviving the King of Curses once again. Nothing much would change after that, with Gojo fighting Sukuna briefly before taking Yuji back to Jujutsu High. Once at the school, Gojo would explain to Yuji what exactly was going on and ask him why he tried to be friends with the cursed spirits that attacked him. Yuji would respond by saying everyone deserves a chance to redeem themselves, even cursed spirits. Gojo would find this amusing and would just let Yuji do as he likes, although he would warn him that trying to be friends with cursed spirits might put his and his comrades' lives at risk. After that, Gojo would bring Yuji to Principal Yaga, and just like before, Yuji briefly fights Yaga's cursed corpse, grabs it, tells Yaga he refuses to live with regrets, and earns his place at Tokyo Jujutsu High. The next day, Gojo would take Yuji and Megami to meet Nobara, and this is when Yuji actually fights a cursed spirit and kills it. Well, in the original story, I mean. But would this version of Yuji do that? Well, not exactly. You see, once Yuji and Nobara enter the building and split up, he faces off against this weird-looking curse. The curse would try to ambush Yuji, but he would easily dodge it. Yuji would then try speaking to the curse, just like at the school, telling it how he understands its pain and just wants to be friends. The curse wouldn't respond, as I don't think it knew how to speak, and just kept attacking Yuji. Eventually, he would give up trying to recruit the curse and end up slicing it up with his cursed tool. This would really bum Yuji out. Meanwhile, Gojo would tell Megami that Yuji is sometimes too kind, and trying to befriend curses might do more harm than good, which is why he's testing him to see if his methods actually work. As Nobara faces her own cursed spirit, who's holding a child hostage, Yuji would arrive, but instead of instantly beating up the curse, he would tell Nobara to wait and let him talk to the curse. Nobara would be confused, but would reluctantly listen to Yuji. He would then talk to the curse, telling him that if he doesn't let go of the boy, he's going to die, and if he does, then they can be friends. If not, he'll die anyway. Seeing as this cursed spirit had some intelligence and was afraid to die, I think he would let go of the child and hand him over. Nobara would be mad and tell Yuji that he can't be friends with a curse, but Yuji would tell her it's alright. Curses also have a right to live. These words would resonate deeply with this curse, and it would begin seeing Yuji as a good guy. To Megami's surprise, Yuji, Nobara, and the curse would all come out of the building together. Megami would want to attack, but Yuji would tell him to stop, as he is now on their side and can help in the upcoming battles. Confused, Megami would ask Gojo if this is okay. Gojo would just say it's fine, as long as the curse doesn't do anything funny, and if it tries, he'll kill it himself. This would strike fear into the curse, and he would know never to hurt any human ever again. Yuji would then tell the curse to stay out of sight for now, as they are going back to Jujutsu High and he can't come. The curse would be sad to see Yuji leave, but he would listen and just hide out for now. Okay, I know you might be asking how this is even possible. Well, you must remember that curses only really attack humans out of enjoyment. It's not a necessity, so if someone were to treat them with kindness and not be afraid of them, maybe they would change. As even in the original, Jogo's whole mission was to allow curses to live freely like humans, and Yuji would basically allow them to do so on the condition that they don't hurt or target humans. However, around a month later, Yuji would find out that not every curse wants to coexist with humans. You see, at this time, the students went on a mission to evacuate the detention center, and it's at this point that Yuji faces off against this special grade, loses, and Sukuna takes over. So the events here unfold mostly the same up until Yuji and Megami are attacked by the special grade. The special grade would attack the two sorcerers, forcing them to fall back, but just before things could get bad, Yuji's cursed spirit friend would arrive just in time to hold him off. He would communicate to Yuji in some way that they should run. Yuji wouldn't want to, but Megami would carry him away. But this cursed spirit wouldn't be nearly strong enough to win a battle against this special grade, and sadly, our cursed spirit friend would die while Yuji watched from a distance. Yuji would cry for the curse as he finally thought he had made a new friend, but this would make Yuji Yuji realized that not every curse can be reasoned with. As they escaped with Nobara, they would send word to a few high-ranking sorcerers, and they would arrive to finish off the special grade. Watching his friend die made Yuji realize that he needs to get stronger if he wants to impose his ideas on curses that are way stronger than the average. This means he would be training really hard and become much stronger in this scenario. A few days would pass, and Gojo would come to visit Yuji. He would tell the boy that his actions in his previous missions and him befriending cursed spirits really ticked the higher-ups off. But since Gojo doesn't really listen to the higher-ups anyway, and he heard what that cursed spirit friend did for them from Megumi, he would tell Yuji not to worry. He'll handle it, and maybe making friends with curses is the best way to finally end the violence. Gojo would also hand him another one of Sukuna's fingers they got from the special grade, and Yuji would eat it. After that, Gojo would leave, and on the road would get ambushed by Jogo just like before. The fight would begin as usual, with Gojo beating up the curse for a little bit. He would then try to use Yuji's talk no Jujutsu and talk to Jogo, asking him if he wants to join the sorcerer's side. Jogo would tell him that he's crazy. Gojo would realize he's not very good at this and teleport Yuji to the battlefield just like before to see if he can talk to Jogo instead. Yuji would then try to convince Jogo to stop killing humans and join their side, but Jogo still wouldn't listen. He would then open his domain, trying to end the two of them, but just as he could do so, Gojo would open his own and rip Jogo's head off his body. But unlike the main story, Yuji would tell Gojo to take him prisoner, as he would like to talk to him again. Gojo would listen, and just before Hanami could arrive to rescue Jogo, they would all teleport away. Okay, this whole situation went completely differently from before, and the best part is that Jogo wouldn't be available to help Kenjaku during Shibuya. Once they get back to the school and Jogo was locked up, Yuji would come over often to talk to Jogo, telling him everything about his life and his idea of friendship. Jogo would begin to realize that Yuji isn't like the rest of the other sorcerers, but he would still not fully trust him. That would all change when Yuji told Jogo that his goal is to coexist with cursed spirits, each benefiting from the other and not hurting one another, as this is what it truly means to be human. This would move Jogo completely, and he would realize that his goal of cursed spirits being able to live as true humans can be realized with Yuji's help. He would then tell Yuji that he would help him as long as his fellow cursed spirits can enjoy this world just like humans do. And just like that, Jogo would become Yuji's new cursed spirit friend. With Jogo now helping the sorcerers, he would tell them everything about Kenjaku and his plans. The teachers would be skeptical at first, but Yuji would tell them to believe him as Jogo is just like they are, a living being who wants what's best for his people. This would solidify Jogo's trust in following Yuji. This would also mean that the sorcerers would be aware of Kenjaku's plan to attack the Goodwill event and begin planning accordingly. A month would pass by, and Gojo would decide to send Yuji and Nanami on a mission to a movie theater, the same as before. But this time, Jogo would also ask to tag along, and Gojo wouldn't mind this, but he would be watching them from afar just in case Jogo decides to switch sides again. Nanami would find this extremely uncomfortable, but would trust Gojo's judgment. I do believe that with Jogo here to help, the mission would go much smoother than before, up until Mahito arrives to interrupt the fight between Yuji and Junpei. But before that, during the mission, Jogo would begin to realize that what Mahito has been doing, transforming humans into mindless monsters, is wrong, and he would vow to help his fellow cursed spirit change his ways. Once Mahito arrives at the school, Jogo would pop out behind him and tell Mahito that he's decided to coexist with humans, and that he wants the disaster curses to do the same. Mahito would burst out laughing, calling Jogo a traitor and telling him that he'll turn his precious Yuji into a transfigured human. He would then rush past Junpei and touch Yuji's soul, but to his surprise, it wouldn't work because of Sukuna, and Yuji would then capture him using some cursed restraining tools. Yuji would then tell Junpei everything and convince him to join Jujutsu High so they can become friends and work together to bring peace to this world. Junpei would accept and go back to Jujutsu High with Yuji and the others. There, they would lock up Mahito, give a mission report, and enroll Junpei into the school. Sometime after, Yuji, Gojo, and the rest of the sorcerers would begin preparing for Kenjaku's attack on the Goodwill event that Jogo told them about. As they do that, Jogo would sit with Mahito for quite some time, trying to convince him that coexisting with humans is the best thing for them. But Mahito would constantly reject Jogo's ideals. I believe no matter how much Jogo tried to convince him, he would never agree. Eventually, Kenjaku would send Hanami and some curse users to attack the school, as he got intel from Kokichi that they are keeping Mahito prisoner. From there, the Goodwill event would go much the same as before, with Hanami attacking the students during their bouts. But this time, they would be ready for him. As soon as Hanami came face to face with Yuji and Todo, Jogo would arrive, surprising his fellow cursed spirit. Jogo would tell Hanami everything and ask him to hear Yuji out. I do believe that Hanami would listen, as even in the original story, he wasn't really interested in fighting and always went along with what Jogo Jogo said. So after listening to Yuji's idea of curses and humans coexisting, he would agree to join forces in making that a reality, partly because he trusts Jogo's judgment. And Todo would just be standing there being weirded out by curses joining their side. But unfortunately for the sorcerers, not everything went according to plan. You see, Kenjaku would find out from Kokichi that Jogo has actually switched sides, and has told the sorcerers everything about his plans. So he would change a few things by coming to the school himself, sneaking in where Mahito was imprisoned, breaking him out, and stealing the death painting wombs before escaping along with the other cursed users. As Jogo, Yuji, and Hanami head back to check on Mahito, they would see that he is escaped, and alert everyone that they should prepare for an all-out war. But before the Shibuya incident could happen, a few days later, Yuji, Nobara, and Megumi would be sent on a mission to investigate the bridge victims. As you all know, this arc is when Yuji meets his brothers for the first time. During the fight between the death paintings and Yuji and Nobara, Yuji would tell Nobara that they shouldn't kill them, as he wants to defeat and take them into talk. With Yuji being much stronger than 𝒂𝒄𝒐𝒆𝒄 and 𝑘𝒕𝒄𝒄, I do think this battle would go the sorcerer's side, and they would have both the brothers on the brink of death. Yuji would then ask them to hear him out. They wouldn't really have a choice as they're both badly hurt. He would then explain to them everything, how Jogo and Hanami are on their side, and ask the two death paintings to forgive him for hurting them so badly. But this was the only way he thought they would listen. As he says this, the two brothers would have the same memory Chozo had in the original story, and would realize that Yuji is actually their brother. Out of nowhere, 𝒂𝒄𝒏 and 𝑘𝒕𝒄𝒏 would yell, "Brother, we're with you!" to Yuji, which would confuse him, but he would just go along with it, as this was basically his goal all along, to convince them to join his side. As they all head back to regroup with Megumi, 𝒂𝒄𝒏 and 𝑘𝒕𝒄𝒏 would let Yuji know that they have one more brother, and that they won't join until they convince Chozo to come as well. Seeing as Yuji is very trusting of cursed spirits in this timeline, I think he would let them regroup with Chozo and tell them to meet in a couple of days near Jujutsu High. This would drive Nobara insane, calling Yuji crazy for letting them go because they might be lying. But Yuji would just tell her that she shouldn't worry. Some time would pass, and Chozo, 𝒂𝒄𝒏, and 𝑘𝒕𝒄𝒏 would finally meet up with Yuji. Chozo would still be skeptical about the whole thing, but eventually, as Yuji explained everything, he would also get the emotional memory that his brothers got, and realize that Yuji is one of them. So this would mean that along with Hanami and Jogo, Yuji would have recruited all three brothers to his side. There's absolutely no way Kenjaku can win this now. Anyways, Yuji would then introduce his brothers to Jogo, Hanami, and the rest of the sorcerers, and together would devise a plan to take down Kenjaku and continue Yuji's mission of curses and humans coexisting. This wouldn't really sit well with all the sorcerers, as they found it really hard to trust the things they've been killing all their lives. But eventually, Gojo would convince everyone to set aside their differences and band together for Yuji. Yuji would then tell Chozo and the rest of the death paintings to go back to Kenjaku and act like nothing happened. They would listen and head back while Jogo and Hanami began training with some of the sorcerers to prepare them for the war ahead. Also, I forgot to mention that Kokichi still dies in this timeline during his fight against Mahito. Soon enough, the Shibuya incident would finally begin. Despite not having the same firepower they had in the main timeline, Kenjaku and Mahito would still carry on with the plan, with the help of some cursed users, cursed spirits, and transfigured humans. Same as before, Gojo would be the first on the scene, but unlike the main story, Jogo and Hanami would enter along with him, and they would also let Yuji know where to find the barrier caster. Yuji would head straight for him and, just as he'd been doing this entire video, would quickly overpower the grasshopper curse before convincing him to join their side. He would then break the seal, opening the barrier for everyone to enter. Meanwhile, as Gojo, Jogo, and Hanami search for Kenjaku and Mahito, they would link up with Chozo and the others. Here, Chozo would let them know where exactly they are hiding. While Gojo takes care of that, Hanami and Jogo roam around the entire Shibuya station trying to persuade their fellow cursed spirits to join Yuji's side. And it would actually work. Dagon would join, and loads of other cursed spirits and cursed users would join too. Eventually, Gojo would find Mahito alone with a bunch of transfigured humans. As Gojo prepared to attack, Kenjaku would appear right behind him. Even though Gojo knew Kenjaku stole Geto's body from Jogo and Hanami, the memories of his best friend still affected him, just in time for Kenjaku to trap him inside the prison realm. But before they could escape with the prison realm, everyone would arrive. All the cursed spirits Yuji and Jogo recruited, all the sorcerers, everyone. Yuji would give the two of them a choice: join the new world they're trying to build, or die fighting for a lost cause. Mahito, just as stubborn as ever, would try fighting back, but unfortunately for him, Hanami and Jogo would knock him out and restrain him with their abilities. Kenjaku would eventually realize there's no point in fighting. He can't win this and would surrender. The two would be taken back to Jujutsu High, and every human in Shibuya would be set free. Gojo would also be released from the prison realm. As the entire Human Curse Alliance heads back to Jujutsu High, they would all celebrate their victory and work towards ushering in a new age for the Jujutsu world. Meanwhile, this all happened while Sukuna was stuck in a 16-year-old boy's body with nothing to do but watch with an annoyed face.
I kind of feel bad for Sukuna. Kinda.
Next up,
Have you ever wondered what would have happened if Gojo had the ability to steal curse techniques? What kind of crazy techniques would he get in this scenario? And most importantly, how strong would he become? Well, this scenario would begin pretty similarly to Gojo's early life in the main story, with Gojo being born having both the 6 eyes and the limitless technique. However, in this timeline, Gojo would also have a second curse technique that allows him to steal techniques of the people he defeats, just like our previous video with Yuji. And as you all know, that ability is pretty broken. But unlike our previous video, Gojo and everyone would already know he has this technique because of his 6 eyes. This allows him to instantly analyze anyone's cursed energy and determine how their technique functions, including his own, of course. This would mean that Gojo would be even more feared than in the original story, which is crazy to think about because, I mean, everyone was afraid of this dude being born that they put a bounty on his head as a child, which is just absurd. But anyway, his childhood would be pretty much the same as before. Gojo would grow up and eventually join Jujutsu High alongside Geto and all his other classmates. Okay, so far nothing really changed, and Gojo's ability hasn't really been used yet. But that would all change once he and Geto are sent on a mission to keep the star plasma vessel, Riko Amanai, safe until she can merge with Tengen. The mission would begin the same as before, with Geto arriving at the building where Riko was, saving her from falling and taking care of one of the members of Q, while Gojo pretty much destroyed this dude. But unfortunately, we don't know what this guy's cursed technique was, so Gojo wouldn't steal it. Meanwhile, Toji would be tasked to kill the star plasma vessel for a big sum of money. I think with Gojo having the ability to steal cursed techniques and Toji knowing about it, due to him being part of the Zenin clan when Gojo was born, would be kinda reluctant at first to take on the job because he wouldn't really know how many techniques Gojo has stolen, or if he has stolen any. But he would eventually decide to do it anyway, seeing as he is a gambling addict and probably thinks he can tire him out just like in the original. It's important to note that during this mission, Gojo doesn't really fight a whole lot of sorcerers, with Geto taking care of most of them, like this Shikigami user. Gojo does fight this cursed user whose technique is pretty interesting. During a school day for Riko, some cursed users attacked her school in order to capture her, but unfortunately for them, Geto and Gojo arrived in time, and that's when this cursed user fought Gojo. He can basically create clones of himself that are as strong as the original. Gojo would find this technique to be very powerful in the right hands, and after using Reversal Red to trick the cursed user, he would punch him right in the face, defeating him and stealing his technique. This would be Gojo's first technique he's ever stolen. Okay, now this is crazy. Just imagine Gojo using this technique along with Limitless. He would have like 5 different clones of himself doing Hollow Purple at the same time. Just how broken would he be? But anyway, after the mission, Gojo and Geto would take the star plasma vessel on a little trip. Here, Gojo would tell Geto about the technique he just stole, and that he'll make his clones keep watch of the surrounding area while they are on vacation, so that Riko can enjoy her time without getting attacked. That way, he doesn't have to keep his infinity on the whole time, which means he won't be as tired as he was before. But that doesn't mean keeping clones of himself for so long doesn't cause him some fatigue. Eventually, the group would finally reach the Jujutsu school in Tokyo, and it's around this time that Gojo fought Toji in the original story. But would Toji be able to sneak up on Gojo like before with his clones on patrol? Well, I believe he would somehow. Toji has been preparing for this ambush the whole time, and he was the one who put a bounty on Riko's head, which the clone user was trying to get. So it's possible that Toji knew Gojo stole his technique, or at least assumed and planned accordingly. So just like before, he would sneak up on Gojo, stabbing him in the chest, shocking everyone, before getting attacked by both Gojo and Geto. Gojo would then tell Geto to get Riko as far away as possible because he's gonna take care of Toji by himself. Geto would agree, knowing Gojo doesn't really need backup because he can create his own with the clone technique. The fight would begin just as before, with Toji trying to break through his defenses with super speed, while Gojo keeps him at bay with blue. Eventually, Gojo would spawn 5 of his clones and go on the offense, throwing 5 different max maximum output blues at Toji. He would dodge all of them and send over a swarm of fly heads at Gojo to distract him before finding his real body, bypassing Gojo's infinity with the inverted spear of heaven and stabbing him in the throat before cutting up his entire body, causing all his clones to disappear except for one. At this point, Toji thought he had won the battle, but what he didn't know was that Gojo's stolen clone technique allows him to switch which clone body is actually the real one, which is accurate to the actual story. So in that split second, Gojo switched bodies. This would shock Toji completely. At that moment, I believe that Gojo would awaken much earlier than he did in the main story, because of the near-death moment he just experienced. Gojo would figure out how to use Hollow Purple and destroy the Sorcerer Killer before he could kill the Star Plasma Vessel. Because Gojo beat Toji much earlier, Riko doesn't die and decides she doesn't want to merge with Tengen. Geto and Gojo would listen to her request and allow her to live a normal life. I do believe Tengen wouldn't mind this, as even in the main story, he never merged with her anyway, and was still able to keep his consciousness intact, so it would be the same here. But even though Riko never died, Geto would still end up going through depression due to him constantly consuming cursed spirits. Eventually, everything would blow up when he is sent on a mission to this village, where he massacres everyone there. And just like before, Gojo wouldn't be able to convince his friend to come back, and Geto would become the leader of the Star religious group. A few years would pass, and the events of Jujutsu Kaisen 0 would take place, with Gojo becoming a teacher and bringing Yuta to join Jujutsu High, helping him control his powers, and eventually, the night parade of 100 demons would begin. The arc would play out similarly to the original, with Yuta fighting Geto and injuring him badly. As Geto leaves the battlefield, fatally wounded, he would encounter Gojo, and just like before, they would have a heartfelt moment. If you remember correctly, in the original, Gojo actually executes Geto off-screen, but doesn't dispose of his body properly, which is why Kenjaku ends up taking over his body. So the same would happen here. Before that, however, Geto would tell Gojo to steal his technique as his final thanks to his best friend. Gojo would agree and execute his best friend. A rush of cursed energy would go through his body as he now possesses Geto's cursed spirit manipulation. Now, because Gojo stole Geto's technique, Kenjaku wouldn't be able to use it, but that doesn't destroy his plans entirely. Kenjaku would still decide to take over Geto's body, but this time, he would plan to kill Gojo and take over his body with his brain-swapping technique rather than sealing him. This would allow him to use all the techniques Gojo stole, including cursed spirit manipulation. Okay, so far, Gojo has 2 cursed techniques he's stolen along with his 6 eyes and Limitless. He's already super broken, but that's just the start because the next cursed techniques he steals will make him even more broken than he already is. Also, I forgot to mention that during the fight against Miguel, even though Gojo defeated him, he didn't want to steal his cursed technique as he didn't think it suited his style. Anyways, a few years would pass, and the events of the original story would finally begin, with Yuji eating Sukuna's finger, becoming a Jujutsu High student. You know how it goes. Nothing much would change until Gojo is attacked by Jogo. You see, during this fight, Gojo absolutely destroyed Jogo while showing Yuji how domain expansions work, which wouldn't change. What would change is that after Gojo opens his domain expansion and defeats Jogo, he would steal his curse technique and completely absorb the curse using cursed spirit manipulation way before Hanami could arrive to rescue him, giving Gojo a 3rd stolen technique and a special grade under his control, which is just freaking insane. Anyways, Gojo wouldn't really be active for a while, up until the Goodwill event. During this arc, Kenjaku decides to send some of the cursed spirits to attack the school to steal some cursed objects and the death paintings, as they need more allies because of Gojo, who just absorbed Jogo. Yuji and the students would try to fight off the curses before Gojo arrives and breaks the barrier. Gojo would realize that it would be best if he defeated one of the cursed spirits and stole their technique, which would weaken their forces. So just like before, he would blast Hanami with a Hollow Purple, but unfortunately for Gojo, the blast didn't fully defeat the cursed spirit, and he managed to escape. After that, the school would let the students know that they should prepare for an all-out war. Some time would pass, and the Shibuya incident would finally begin. Despite not having Jogo's help, Kenjaku, Hanami, Mahito, and Dagon would decide to continue with the attack. Same as before, Gojo would be the first one on the scene. He would walk through the barrier and head down the train station to the cursed spirits. There he would find Choso, Hanami, and Mahito. Before he got there, however, Gojo uses his clone technique to leave one of his clones outside to keep a lookout for anyone trying to do anything funny. He also left a clone with both Yuji and Megumi's groups to help the sorcerers in case something went sideways. Anyways, the curses would tell Gojo that he will pay for absorbing Jogo, and he would respond by saying, "Here's their chance," and uses cursed spirit manipulation to spawn Jogo right in front of them. This would anger the curses, and they would try to attack Gojo, but he would just dodge the curses' attacks and overpower them with Jogo's help. The curses would feel so hopeless, thinking they have no way of winning this. Just before Gojo could obliterate the curses, Kenjaku would arrive, and just like the main story, would surprise Gojo. This split second would give the curses the chance to use the prison realm to trap Gojo inside it before figuring out how to kill him. But just as the prison realm latched onto him, Gojo switched with his other clone he left outside the station, making it his real body. As the prison closed, the curses would be relieved to see Gojo sealed, not knowing that it was actually his clone. Kenjaku would tell the curses that they have to take care of the sorcerers outside while he figures out how to kill Gojo. But just as the curses could leave, Gojo would arrive, having his clone technique fully recovered using reverse curse technique, with 5 clones of himself all loading up 5 hollow purples. Gojo would tell the cursed spirits and Kenjaku to hand over all of Sukuna's fingers and the whereabouts of the rest of them. Kenjaku, afraid his plans won't come to fruition, would try to talk his way out, but it would be pointless. Eventually, they would give Gojo all the fingers and tell him where the rest of them are. But as we all know, Gojo is not letting a bunch of villains loose because they gave him a couple of fingers. He would tell the curses, "Psych!" and launch all 5 hollow purples at them. This wouldn't kill them, as Gojo held back to absorb all the cursed spirits with cursed spirit manipulation after they were fatally injured. After that, he would finish off Kenjaku and Choso. With that, Gojo would now have Mahito and Hanami in his arsenal of cursed spirits, which means he can take and use their technique whenever he wants with his stealing ability. He would also have stolen blood manipulation and Kenjaku's cursed technique. Yeah, I know it's getting ridiculous. Gojo's just too powerful. Anyways, he would then sweep the entire station and eliminate any curses that remain. After that, he would head out of the station, and to his surprise, none of his comrades were hurt, and the clones he sent with Yuji and Megumi were all intact. But just before everyone could celebrate, Sukuna would call upon the binding vow he and Yuji created and forcefully take over Yuji's body for 1 minute. You must remember that in this timeline, Yuji still died during the detention center and made the pact with Sukuna to revive him on the condition that he allows Sukuna to take over his body for 1 minute using the word "enchain." As Sukuna takes over, he would rush towards Gojo, taking all the fingers Gojo got from the curses and swallow them whole before anyone could even blink. No one expected this, not even Gojo, which is why he didn't react in time. With Sukuna amped up with 15 fingers of power, Gojo would find himself facing off against the strongest being in history, way earlier than before. Gojo would call out to Mei and Nanami to make sure everyone evacuates the area immediately. As everyone fled, the battle would begin. Sukuna would send a flurry of slashes, cutting through Gojo's body. Thankfully, Gojo would use reverse curse technique to heal himself. Gojo would yell at Sukuna, telling him that he didn't think this was going to be a one-on-one. In that moment, Gojo would spawn all 4 disasters curses he absorbed right in front of Sukuna. He would then tell all the curses to go wild. They would attack Sukuna all at once. But with Sukuna having almost all his fingers in this timeline, I think he would take care of all the curses, destroying all of them simultaneously in a domain expansion. Although the disaster curses were much weaker than Sukuna, they did distract him long enough for Gojo to finish the chant for a maximum hollow purple. And when Sukuna's domain collapsed, Gojo would send the blast right at him, destroying the King of Curses completely. Gojo knew this attack would be the end of his student as well, but he did it anyway, knowing this would be what Yuji wanted. Unfortunately for everyone, Yuji would die a tragic hero. Everyone would mourn his death, but they would know this is what he actually truly wanted.
There are still 2 more what-if scenarios left, so don't go anywhere.
Have you ever wondered what would happen if Gojo Satoru was never born? Would the Jujutsu world manage to survive without the strongest sorcerer? Or would everything collapse into complete chaos? I spent way too long mapping out every single timeline shift, and I swear you will not be able to guess who ends up as the most powerful sorcerer by the end of this story. First things first, we need to understand just how much the balance of the Jujutsu world depends on Gojo's existence. You see, Gojo wasn't just born strong. His birth literally literally shifted the entire power dynamic of curses and sorcerers. The moment Satoru Gojo was born with both the 6 Eyes and Limitless technique, cursed energy across the world became more refined and powerful. This is stated throughout the story, so if Gojo was never born, that shift never happens. But here's where it gets interesting. Without Gojo's birth triggering that power escalation, the cursed spirit population in the early years would actually be weaker overall. You'd think that's a good thing, right? Wrong! Because the Jujutsu Society would also remain weaker, stuck in their old traditional ways without any push for innovation or change. The Gojo clan would still exist, but they'd be significantly less influential. Now let's talk about Geto Suguru. This is where things start to get really dark really fast. In the original timeline, Geto and Gojo were best friends at Jujutsu High. They balanced each other out, but without Gojo, Geto's entire trajectory changes. Geto would still be an incredibly talented sorcerer, probably the strongest of his generation at Jujutsu High. He'd still go on that mission to protect the star plasma vessel Riko Amanai. Without Gojo there as backup, that mission goes completely differently. Toji Fushiguro would still be hired to kill Riko, and this time, there's no Gojo to push him to his limits and eventually defeat him. Geto would face Toji alone, and let's be real, pre-awakened Geto versus Toji. Toji wins that fight 9 times out of 10. Geto would get absolutely destroyed by the sorcerer killer, probably killed on the spot. But wait, you might be thinking, doesn't Geto need to survive to become a villain? Well, that's the thing. In this timeline, Geto dying early might actually be a mercy compared to what happens to everyone else. Because without Gojo around, some of your favorite characters are about to meet some truly horrible fates. But before we get to that tragedy, we need to talk about what happens at Jujutsu High after Geto's death. With both Geto and the star plasma vessel dead, Tengen's merger never happens on schedule. Without that merger, Tengen starts to evolve uncontrollably. Over the next few years, Tengen's consciousness begins to fade as they evolve beyond humanity. But it won't be much of a problem since even in the main story, Tengen evolved, but he was still more or less on the sorcerer's side. Now, Jujutsu High still exists, but it's operating under much more conservative leadership. Without Gojo to shake things up and protect the students he believed in, the higher-ups have complete control. Masamichi Yaga is still there as a teacher, but he has way less freedom to bend the rules. Also, due to his ability to create autonomous cursed corpses, he would always be watched closely by the higher-ups. This brings us to Yuta Okkotsu. In the original timeline, Yuta cursed Rika when he was a child, creating the Queen of Curses. When his power went out of control, he was sentenced to immediate execution by the higher-ups. But Gojo intervened, took him under his wing, and helped him understand his power. Without Gojo, Yuta gets executed. Simple as that. There's no one powerful enough or influential enough to oppose the higher-ups' decision. Now let's jump forward to 2018. This is when everything really starts falling apart. Yuji Itadori eats Sukuna's finger. But here's the problem. Without Gojo around, the response to this crisis is completely different. In the original timeline, Gojo saw potential in Yuji and decided to let him live, even convincing the higher-ups to postpone his execution. Gojo wanted Yuji to eat all of Sukuna's fingers before dying so they could kill Sukuna permanently. It was a risky plan, but it was the best shot they had. Without Gojo, though, the higher-ups don't hesitate. As soon as they hear that a random kid ate Sukuna's finger and survived, they order his immediate execution. Megumi Fushiguro, who was there when Yuji ate the finger, would be ordered to bring him back to Jujutsu High for execution. In this timeline, Megumi ended up being sold to the Zenin clan as per the agreement with Toji and Naobito, even though his father was still alive. Toji is just allergic to being a father. Back to the present. Now, Megumi might try to argue for Yuji's life because that's who Megumi is. He sees the good in people, but without Gojo's protection and influence, Megumi's words mean nothing to the higher-ups. Yuji gets executed within days of becoming a vessel. But wait, there's an even bigger problem. Who actually executes Yuji? In the original timeline, it was supposed to be Yuta eventually, but Yuta's already dead in this timeline, so it would probably fall to a special grade sorcerer or a group of grade 1 sorcerers. Here's where it gets messy. Sukuna's not just going to let his vessel die quietly. The moment they try to execute Yuji, Sukuna would absolutely take over and fight back. We're talking about a pissed off Sukuna with only 1 finger's worth of power, but still, he's Sukuna. He'd kill whoever was trying to execute Yuji. Break free, and now you have Sukuna loose in Tokyo with no Gojo to stop him. And it gets worse. Mahito himself becomes an even bigger problem. Without Yuji around to push him and make him grow through their fights, Mahito actually develops slower as a curse. But that doesn't make him less dangerous. It just means he takes a different path. He's still experimenting on humans, still killing people. He just has no natural enemy to challenge him. And here's something really messed up. Without Gojo in the world, Kenjaku's plans actually become way easier to execute. Think about it. Kenjaku's entire strategy in the main timeline had to account for Gojo Satoru, the one person person who could potentially ruin everything. That's why he needed to seal Gojo in the prison realm before making his move. But without Gojo, Kenjaku doesn't need to waste time with the Shibuya incident. He can just proceed directly to his endgame. Now I know what you're thinking. This is already catastrophically bad. Everyone's dying, curses are winning, and there's no one strong enough to stand against them. But believe me, we haven't even gotten to the worst part yet, because I haven't told you what happens with Sukuna, or who actually ends up becoming the strongest, or how the entire world of Jujutsu Kaisen ends up changing forever. So stick with me, because the next part is absolutely insane. Alright, let's talk about what Kenjaku does without Gojo in his way. Remember, Kenjaku has been planning for over 1,000 years to merge humanity with Tengen. This required an incredibly complex plan involving sealing Gojo, starting the culling games, and using thousands of people as players. But without Gojo, Kenjaku can take a much more direct approach. With Tengen already destabilized from missing their merger with Riko, Kenjaku just needs to wait for the right moment. Tengen evolves to a point where they can no longer maintain their human form, and that's when Kenjaku strikes. He'd forcefully absorb Tengen using his cursed spirit manipulation, taking control of their technique and their barrier network across Japan. With that power, Kenjaku could activate a modified version of the culling games immediately, forcing non-sorcerers across Japan to awaken cursed techniques using the cursed objects he's prepared. But here's the thing, without the main cast to oppose him, there's no one to stop the games from running their course. Millions of people across Japan suddenly gain cursed techniques with no idea how to control them. The chaos is unimaginable. People are dying left and right, curses are spawning from the negative emotions, and Jujutsu society is completely overwhelmed. The surviving sorcerers, people like Hanami, Mei, Yuki, and the students, would try to fight back, but they're hopelessly outnumbered and outmatched. Nanami, without Yuji's help and support, probably dies fighting a special grade curse. Nobara never even becomes a sorcerer in this timeline, since she came to Tokyo specifically because of Yuji's generation. Now remember that Sukuna is still out there somewhere after escaping his execution. With only one finger's worth of power, he's weaker than in the main timeline, but he's free, and he's hunting for his other fingers. Kenjaku, being the strategic genius he is, would definitely try to make a deal with Sukuna. He'd offer to help Sukuna find his remaining fingers in exchange for Sukuna's cooperation in the merger plan. Sukuna, who only cares about causing chaos and fighting strong opponents, would probably agree just for the entertainment value. Together, they'd be absolutely unstoppable. Kenjaku, with Tengen's power and barrier techniques, and Sukuna growing stronger with each finger he recovered. They'd systematically hunt down and destroy the remaining Jujutsu sorcerers. The Zenin clan would fall first. Without Gojo to keep them in check, they'd grown even more arrogant and powerful over the years. But that arrogance would be their downfall. Sukuna would personally slaughter the entire clan, including Naobito and Naoya, just for fun. Maki and Mai never get their character development or power-ups because the circumstances never push them to that point. Megumi's fate is particularly tragic in this timeline. Without Yuji as his friend, and without Gojo as his mentor, Megumi never develops the confidence to push his technique further, and he would be pushed into the Zenin family's horrible ideals and way of life. When Sukuna eventually finds him, interested in his 10 Shadows technique like in the main timeline, Megumi can't fight back effectively. Sukuna just kills him and moves on. He wouldn't really want to take over his body, as there is no Satoru Gojo, the reason why he needed 10 Shadows technique. So, who becomes the strongest sorcerer in this timeline? Who rises up to challenge Sukuna and Kenjaku when everyone else has fallen? The answer is someone you probably didn't expect. Kinji Hikari. Here's why this makes sense. Hikari is already established as someone just as talented as Yuta in the main timeline. He's a third-year student who left Jujutsu High because he disagreed with the higher-ups. Without Gojo around, Hikari stays independent and continues developing his technique on his own. When the culling games begin and chaos erupts across Japan, Hikari sees it as an opportunity. His fever-based cursed technique, Private Pure Love Train, gives him essentially unlimited cursed energy when he hits a jackpot, making him one of the few sorcerers who can fight special-grade threats for extended periods. Hikari would gather survivors, including his friend Kirara, and create a resistance movement against Kenjaku and Sukuna's reign of terror. He'd be fighting not because he's a hero, but because of the fever of becoming the strongest. But here's the tragic reality. Even Hikari can't win this fight. Sukuna, after recovering at least 10 of his fingers, is just too strong. Their final battle would happen in the ruins of Tokyo, with Hikari landing jackpot after jackpot, pushing himself beyond his limits. He'd actually land some serious hits on Sukuna, forcing the King of Curses to acknowledge his strength. But in the end, Sukuna would adapt to Hikari's pattern and cut him down. Hikari dies standing with a grin on his face. With all opposition eliminated, Kenjaku successfully completes the merger with Tengen and humanity. The world of Jujutsu Kaisen as we know it ends. Humanity is forcefully evolved into a new form of existence where everyone is constantly connected to cursed energy. But here's the final twist. Sukuna doesn't actually care about Kenjaku's new world. Once the merger is complete and there are no more strong opponents to fight, Sukuna becomes bored. In a final act of chaos, he betrays and kills Kenjaku, destroying the merged Tengen entity and throwing the new world into even more chaos. Man, this really makes you appreciate what Gojo did for the Jujutsu world, doesn't it? Did you ever wonder what would have happened if Dabura was at the Shibuya incident? Would he be able to destroy every cursed spirit? And most importantly, would Gojo and Sukuna be able to defeat him in an epic fight? Well, as Dabura opens his eyes, the first thing he sees is the familiar metallic interior of the alien ship, but something feels off. Looking out the glass, he sees Tokyo, Shibuya to be exact, with the ship hovering silently over the city. Dabura would be confused as he realizes he's back on Earth. He would think it's some kind of weird jujutsu technique the Earthlings used against him. With all his memories from Modulo intact, he thinks back to his fight with Mahoraga. Eventually, he would decide to come down from the ship to explain his situation to the sorcerers. But just before he does, he senses a huge amount of cursed energy coming from the subway, before it quickly vanishes. As Dabura descends from the ship and lands on the ground outside Shibuya Station, the sorcerers below freeze completely. His overwhelming presence and killing intent is so massive that every sorcerer would ready their attacks long before he reached the ground. Dabura tries to speak to the sorcerers, asking where Maru and his other comrades are. The sorcerers would obviously have no idea what he's talking about, as they have no clue who these people are. With every sorcerer in fear of even moving, Hanami would take it upon himself as the senior Jujutsu sorcerer and ask Dabura which side is he on. Dabura raises both hands slightly and says that he's a friend of the humans, and that they should forgive him. His presence tends to have this effect on people. All the sorcerers would be relieved, still suspicious, but they would be more relaxed than before. Yuji greets him with a smile and asks what he is exactly. Dabura would reply saying he's an alien, or at least he thinks that's what humans call his kind. Yuji would have like a million questions before Megumi stopped him from yapping. That's when Dabura realizes he's not in the same time as before. He's been transported into a different time, where aliens have not made contact with Earth yet, and whatever's happening in this city right now is something the sorcerers are scrambling to contain. Yuji would ask Megumi if he thinks this guy could help with the situation and free Gojo. Still shocked by the presence of this calamity, Megumi would just nod and silently say he doesn't think asking random beings for help is a good idea. Yuji, being Yuji, tries anyway, asking Dabura if he could help them free their sensei. He's the strongest sorcerer alive, but he's imprisoned inside something known as the prison realm. Dabura asks Yuji to clarify what he means by the strongest sorcerer, and Yuji tells the alien that Gojo can't be beaten. This would make Dabura super excited, as he thinks of a second fight against one of Earth's strongest beings. Dabura agrees to help the sorcerers as long as, after Shibuya is done, he and this so-called Gojo be allowed to fight to see who's truly the strongest warrior. Although reluctant at first, still not trusting Dabura, the sorcerers would eventually agree, thinking Gojo will probably win. Before entering Shibuya, Dabura senses the same energy as Yuka in Megumi and asks him where Mahoraga is. Megumi would be stunned, as he couldn't understand how the alien knew about the 10 shadows. Dabura tells Megumi that he fought him once upon a time, before heading down into the subway station to deal with the curses. As Dabura heads for Gojo, the sorcerers would go around Shibuya, saving as many humans as they can and taking out weak enemies so that they don't interfere with Dabura. Now, I know this might be a little far-fetched for the sorcerers to just trust Dabura like that, but hey, even in Modulo, the humans had no choice with the aliens having a force that strong as their leader. Anyways, as Dabura moves through the station, standing in the middle of the tunnel is Choso. Choso looks at the alien with disbelief. He thinks to himself, there's no way this guy is human. Dabura politely asks him if he's an enemy or a friend of the sorcerers. Choso, too stunned to speak, sends piercing blood right into Dabura's path. Dabura blocks the attack using his arm, but unfortunately for Choso, it pierces the alien's skin, which would surprise Dabura just a little bit. Dabura looks at Choso and asks him what kind of jujutsu is this, but Choso wouldn't answer and launch a second attack, but this time, he hesitated. Something about the way this creature took his piercing blood without reacting is really unsettling. Choso fires the second shot, hoping to kill him this time, but unfortunately, Dabura would end the death painting right there, as he waved his hand, slapping the blood mid-air and pulling Choso's head off his shoulders. Dabura would be kind of sad. He expected more of a fight, but maybe he went overboard a little bit. Across Shibuya, all the cursed spirits, including Kenjaku, sense an overwhelming pressure as they realize Choso has just been killed. And as as curious and foolish as ever, Mahito would be the first to rush to the scene to see who did this. Before Mahito can reach him, Dabura finds his second opponent. In the anime, when Maki and the others fought Dagon, he was still in his weakened form before awakening, so I'd assume that would be the case here as well. Dagon would change into his full form, which would startle Dabura at first. In this form, Dagon sends a massive wave of water towards Dabura, which he would find pretty interesting. But Dagon doesn't respond and continues flooding the station. For a split second, Dabura can't move freely, but after that brief lapse of concentration, he would just fly over the water, not knowing what the hell was going on. Dagon does the only thing left to him. He opens his domain. Dabura would be so fascinated by this, as this is his first time seeing a domain that isn't his own. But eventually, he would decide this confrontation has gone on for too long and decapitate Dagon with a kick to the head. Man, these battles have been pretty underwhelming for Dabura. Maybe his next fight will be somewhat challenging. As Dabura proceeds through the station, he would come face to face with Toji, who sensed Dabura's cursed energy, which was impossible to ignore. It's important to remember that in the original story, Toji fought Dagon using Playful Cloud, which made his fight so easy. But in this scenario, Maki isn't there, so he doesn't have Playful Cloud. And this slight change makes this fight really hard and practically impossible for Toji to win. Toji, without hesitation, would rush Dabura and engage in close hand-to-hand combat. With Dabura not really sure what to make of this, he would ask Toji while they're exchanging blows why he has no cursed energy. Toji would smile, saying he has no clue, and continue trying to open Dabura's defenses. Dabura would deem Toji to be a great warrior and ask him what his name is before he ends his life. Stunned by Dabura's confidence, Toji would yell out his name and charge a final time before getting his heart ripped out of his chest and his head stabbed with his own weapon. While Dabura cuts a path through the underground, the situation above is evolving in a very different way. Jogo finds Yuji and Megumi outside the station. Before Megumi can summon Mahoraga, Jogo puts a boot through his ribs and sends him sliding across the floor. Jogo would then knock out Yuji and feed him all 10 fingers just like the main story. Everything else would play out the same as before, with Sukuna awakening, fighting Jogo, destroying the entire city and killing him. This would also be around the same time Uruame shows up to greet her old master. Meanwhile, curious to see who killed Choso, Mahito would finally find Dabura. While Mahito tries to get Dabura's attention, Dabura gets annoyed and sends a light beam at Mahito. Too slow to react, the light beam would hit Mahito flush. But to Dabura's surprise, Mahito isn't dead yet. As he explains to Dabura, the only way to hurt him outside a domain is by understanding and damaging his soul, which would pique Dabura's interest. Mahito would try attacking the alien, but he'd be way too slow to even get close to the light-speed alien sorcerer. Unfortunately for Mahito, the games had to stop, as Dabura finally opened his domain, exercising the cursed spirit with his sure hit effect. Wow, it's crazy to think that Mahito wouldn't land a hit in this fight. Somewhere outside the station, Sukuna would find Megumi knocked out. Seeing as this could be his moment to enact his plan, Sukuna would cut off his finger and feed it to Megumi, thus fully manifesting inside Megumi while Yuji watches in disbelief. Just like the main story, he would kick Yuji away before Uruame arrived, taking Sukuna to his bath where he could regain his strength. Sensing Sukuna's energy disappear, Dabura would be kinda disappointed he didn't get a chance to fight such a strong opponent. He would then quickly move on to destroying Hanami and finally reaching Kenjaku. When he finds Kenjaku, it's likely that Kenjaku would speak to the alien first and try to convince him to join his side. Dabura would obviously refuse, and without any other option, Kenjaku would have to prepare to fight. But before that could happen, however, Yuki would arrive. She would then reach into her pocket and bring out the back of the prison realm, which she got from Tengen. She would tell Dabura that they can use this to free Satoru. Dabura would appreciate the help, but reassures her he doesn't need it, while holding a beam of light at Kenjaku's face. This would send shivers down Kenjaku's spine as he begins to feel the overwhelming cursed energy flooding the atmosphere. Knowing he will likely die if he doesn't, Kenjaku would open the prison realm, freeing Gojo. Gojo would be so surprised to see Dabura, but would already understand the level this guy's on, using 6 eyes. Dabura turns to face him fully. As the two beings at the absolute ceiling of power, each registers the other as something worth taking seriously. Before either of them can speak, however, Sukuna appears with Uraume. He looks at Gojo, then at Dabura, then back at Gojo. Finding Dabura too interesting and wanting to finally kill Gojo, he would tell them both that they should have a battle to decide who is truly the strongest. Gojo would be surprised to see Sukuna in Megumi's body, but agrees to Sukuna's request, and so does Dabura. The date of the fight, 1 week after the Shibuya incident. In the meantime, Dabura would wait inside his spaceship, occasionally taking walks into the city to eat some of the Earthlings' delicious food. Meanwhile, on the sorcerer's side, things are a little different. Yuta is back to help train Yuji and and the others just in case Dabura turns out to be evil. On the other side of the city, Uraume would have found most of Sukuna's fingers, bringing him back to his full strength. A week later, the day of the three-way deadlock would finally arrive. It would begin similarly to the main story, with Gojo sending a 200% hollow purple straight at Sukuna. Sukuna would block it, thinking to himself, where exactly is this alien? Did he forget? Gojo would approach Sukuna and they would have a brief conversation before, suddenly, from the sky, a flash of light would beam straight down at the two of them. By the skin of their teeth, the two sorcerers would dodge this attack, with Gojo getting his arm cut off, and so did Sukuna. They would both scoff, saying he truly is one of us. Dabura would look down at the two sorcerers as he came down from the sky. He would say to both Gojo and Sukuna that they must show him the true power of Earth's Jujutsu. Inside the broadcast room, Yuji asks Yuta who he thinks is going to win. Yuta would say he's not sure. Nobura breaks into the conversation, asking everyone if aliens eat noodles, because apparently this one just spent 4 hours at a ramen shop, and that's kind of funny if you ask her. Meanwhile, as the three sorcerers clash, Sukuna would say, shall we all reveal our techniques to their true capabilities? Gojo would agree and release red at both of them. Dabura would easily dodge it, running straight at Gojo with a light speed attack so fast that Gojo's eyes couldn't even see his kick. The attack would land, or at least Dabura thought. He would see his leg hitting against infinity with Gojo smiling. Sukuna yells at both Gojo and Dabura, asking them if they forgot about him before sending multiple dismantles with maximum output at both combatants. Dabura would dodge the attack while Gojo just stands there, knowing these attacks won't touch him. Sukuna would scoff, saying that pesky infinity is such a nuisance, and before preparing the hand sign for a domain, all three of them say it at the same time. Domain expansion. In the tug-of-war, Sukuna's barrierless domain proves its superiority, as he wins the tug-of-war, sending slashes cutting both Gojo and Dabura until they look unrecognizable. Gojo emerges from the collapse of the domain visibly damaged. Dabura emerges looking significantly worse. He would be impressed and ask Sukuna to show him more. With everyone's reverse curse technique fully active, Gojo would announce a second clash of domains. This time, Gojo shrank his domain to the size of a basketball, which made his domain more stable, and his gamble paid off. Dabura's inexperience with Jujutsu could not use a simple domain to negate the two domains' sure hit, as his domain got overwhelmed, causing several cuts and brain damage. He would be out for just a second, allowing Gojo and Sukuna to engage in combat. Gojo fires reversal red and laps blue at Dabura, both at maximum output. They both connect. Dabura looks like he's taken too much damage, but out of nowhere, he emerges from the smoke, healed fully, using reverse curse technique. Shall we? He says, in a third domain battle, but this time, seeing Sukuna use a barrierless domain, Dabura would instantly figure out how to do it, that cast a barrierless domain of his own, overwhelming both Gojo's and Sukuna's. As Dabura wins the third domain tug-of-war, he would say, now let me show you true power. Cursed technique reversal. Sukuna and Gojo both just stare in awe at the alien. Dabura, you are truly magnificent. Gojo would smile, finally satisfied in battle. Facing the two strongest, he would accept his fate. In that moment, Dabura's sure hit attack would take effect as the black mass of pure darkness lands, killing both Gojo and Sukuna. In the aftermath, Shinjuku would be in ruins. The students would be devastated to see their sensei gone, and Megumi as well. But they would understand that Gojo felt true happiness in that moment. Dabura, standing in the ruins alone, would say, wow, Earth's Jujutsu is so fun! Gojo, Sukuna, both of you are true warriors. Click this video where I explain what would happen if Sukuna was reborn with his memories and turned good. Come on, you know you want to, click it!